Brilliant. So yeah, welcome everyone to DevOps Manchester. That's our Twitter tag. Anybody that wants to tweet in terms of over to us and as a community of organisers. In terms of tonight, I'll do a short intro. That's what we're running through now. And well, firstly, welcome. Thank you for coming along. We've got two great speakers tonight, actually. I'll run through, do introductions as we come to the speakers themselves. We're going to start off with Sophie. I'll give a bit of an intro around Sophie and Sophie's talk. And then around half past 7, Matthew is going to talk as well for us. And then we'll finish around about 8:30. For tonight as well, because it's a meeting format, just to let people know, there is going to be time for questions following each talk. So what we'd encourage you to do is, if you've got a question, post it into the chat, whilst our speakers are talking tonight, post it into the chat. Or if it's one that you'd rather ask at the end, when we're doing the Q&A session, you can raise on Zoom, you can raise your digital hand, and that allows me to jump over to you and unmute yourself so you can ask your question. The questions in the chat we'll put to Sophie, so Andy will come on for the Q&A session. One of our organisers as well will come on and put those questions towards Sophie during the Q&A session. Okay, so I know you're not here to listen to me. So today we've got Sophie talking for us. Sophie, we've just been discussing, actually, is a principal over at Conflux, but starts in a few weeks' time over at Conflux. Previous talk for us, actually, Sophie done a talk around building teams and designing teams. Again, you can find that on the YouTube channel. I'm sure one of our team will post it into the chat for anybody that's not seen the YouTube channel to catch up on previous talks. Today, Sophie's going to be talking around blameless postmortems and a little bit of, should we say, the human side and why the blameless bit is really important. So I will stop sharing, Sophie, and hand over to yourself.
Thank you. Right, let's do share screen. Which one are you seeing? You're seeing the right one?
Yep, spot on. Yeah, we've got your slides.
Brilliant. Okay. Hi, so my talk this evening is about blameless postmortems, as James said. It's now common practice across the industry to hold a postmortem after there's been a production incident. But I sometimes find myself wondering whether we do this because we're really learning valuable things about our system and our processes, or has it just become a habit, something we do because, well, just because that's what we do. So before I get going, a very quick introduction to me. My name is Sophie Weston. I've worked in tech for about 25 years now, mostly as a software engineer. And for much of that time, I was working with ops teams and writing tools for ops teams. So as a result, I am a bit obsessed with DevOps. Until a couple of weeks ago, I worked at Anaplan in York. I'm currently having a few weeks break, and in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to be starting my new role, which is principal at Conflux. Outside of work, I'm an ambassador for Women in Tech York, and I'm part of the team that organises DevOps Days London. So this is an outline of what we're going to cover in the next maybe 30 minutes or so. First, we'll have a quick recap of what we actually mean by a blameless postmortem, just so we're all on the same page. Then we'll look again at the reasons for holding postmortems, explore some best practices and what goes into making a successful postmortem. And along the way, I'll explain why the blameless bit really does matter. So what is a blameless postmortem? Well, first, let's be clear, nobody actually died. A postmortem is simply the process of trying to understand what happened during a production outage, an incident. And whilst postmortem is what they're often called, we'll also see them referred to as retrospectives, post-incident reviews, root cause analysis, or sometimes as debriefings. But in my experience, postmortem is the most common term. In simple terms, an incident postmortem is basically a meeting. It's a discussion where we get everyone together to talk about what happened during an incident, why it happened, how the team responded, what can be done to prevent similar things happening again in the future, how to improve future responses when they do, because they will, because failure is inevitable. The idea of a blameless postmortem is to do all of that without any finger pointing or blaming of individuals or teams. Okay, so that's a quick recap of what a blameless postmortem is, but why should we do them? And why make such a fuss about them being blameless? This is Google's take on it, taken from their SRE handbook. And it's a good definition or summary of what a blameless postmortem is all about. There's two important points here. In a blameless postmortem, it's assumed that every team and individual acted with good intentions, made the right decision and did the right thing based on the information they had available to them at the time. So I'm going to come back and expand on this point in a little while. But to take the second point first, that we need to avoid having a culture of finger pointing and shaming. This is important for a number of reasons. The first is that, very simply, we don't throw anyone under the bus as a convenient way of explaining away what happened. Not even the intern. So this is from an incident that happened a few months ago, back in June, when a test email was mistakenly sent out to lots of HBO Max customers, and the company promptly blamed the intern. And what's more, they did this very publicly on Twitter. And even though the intern was being helped through this in an apparently supportive and caring way, look, there's even a love heart there, they were still being blamed, and that's not okay. We don't want to make people feel bad about what they've done or haven't done. We talk a lot in our industry about the need to foster a culture of psychological safety. And this is a pretty basic step in trying to achieve that goal. We don't want to make people feel bad of being afraid of failing and of trying new ways of doing things in the future, of being innovative and looking for ways to improve. And as it says in the Google definition, if people are worried about being blamed and shamed, they'll be less likely to bring issues to light, which of course is the opposite of what we want. We want people to feel safe to speak up, to be open and honest about problems they've seen or worries they have, so they can be investigated and addressed before they become the next P1 customer impacting incident. Plus, it's too easy just to blame human error for failures and for incidents. Sadly, we still see this happen far too often. You don't usually have to look very far or very hard to find examples where a production outage is blamed on the actions of an individual or team. There's the case I already mentioned with HBO Max and their poor intern. Another recent-ish example was a major DNS outage at Salesforce back in May, which resulted in their customers not being able to log into the service for over 5 hours. It was so bad that even their own status page couldn't be accessed, apparently. But according to an article in the Register, when they first published their root cause analysis and their chief availability officer gave a briefing on the outage, they blamed a single employee for not having followed procedure when making a config change, and also said that, quote, action had been taken with regard to that employee. This is not only wrong, but it's also short-sighted. Whatever action someone takes, they can only do so if the system enables that action and allows them to do that thing. So you have to move past blaming people and assume that what they were doing was what they thought was for the best at the time. As this is the first point mentioned in the Google definition, which I said I'd return to, that we assume that everyone involved in an incident had good intentions and did the right thing with the information they had available to them at the time, that they made the right decision. Now, not making people feel bad is very important, but this is where the blameless part really matters. It's so important, I've even given it a whole slide all of its own. You have to assume good intent. Because being blameless isn't just about not saying blamey things. It's about not thinking blamey things. I cannot stress how important this is. Because if you think that an incident is someone's fault, and really you think that they're to blame, even if you don't say anything and you're not blamey and you don't make them feel bad about what happened. But if that's what you're really thinking, you'll stop being curious. You'll stop being curious about what happened and you'll stop asking questions. And you need to be genuinely curious and keep asking lots of questions. Otherwise, you won't maximize the learning and the value that it's possible to get from your incident. So something I see happen quite often in postmortems is that people will look to blame themselves for doing something or not doing something that contributed to an incident, or maybe for not spotting there was a problem quickly enough or not coming up with a fix fast enough. And whilst it could be argued that people blaming themselves is better than being blamed by others, this is still something that we should seek to discourage, because it doesn't matter who's doing the blaming. It will have the same effect of killing off that curiosity, shutting down the conversation, and stopping us from looking for other answers and asking the questions we need to ask to learn and get value from an incident. So incidents have been described as unplanned investments where all the costs are paid up front. That upfront payment is in time, in productivity, impact to customers, in goodwill, in revenue. And the return that we get on that investment is the learning that we extract from it. And postmortems are the process that we use to extract that value that we've already paid for. If we view them just as a boring chore, something that we have to do simply because that's what's expected, because that's what the process is, then we're missing out. Because incidents are one of the best opportunities we have to learn about our systems and better understand how they really work, not how we think they work, because those two things are not necessarily the same. So Dr. Richard Cook has spent over 30 years researching complex systems, and in particular how they fail. He actually wrote a paper that's just called How Complex Systems Fail. And the first time I read it, I simply couldn't believe that it hadn't been written specifically about IT systems. It's just so incredibly applicable and relevant. If you haven't read it, you should go read it. It's not very long, but it's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, Dr. Cook describes this difference between how our systems really work and how we think they work as being the system as imagined versus the system as found. Imagined because we never actually see our code running. We don't see our data sat in database tables or see our containers or Kubernetes clusters. We have visual representations and mental models of these things, but we can never actually see our system functioning. And he describes incidents as being messages from the as found system, from the real system, messages that are pointers to areas of interest and bits of wisdom that we ignore at our peril. Now, incidents may be great opportunities for learning, but we have to also recognize that they're messy. We like to try and make them tidy and linear and pinpoint not only the one root cause, but also the precise moment they started and ended with a nice, neat timeline on which all the events fit in an orderly fashion. But the reality is that incidents are messy. It can be hard to say when a problem with the system first started, and at what point does a problem become an incident? And what about all those near misses, those times when we start to see an issue with the system only for it to be resolved by an observant engineer, or the one we all love, for it to magically resolve itself? So extracting the value from our incidents, getting the return on that investment we already made, to convert that into learning and greater understanding isn't always straightforward. We have to put a bit of effort in to make sense of what happened. And to do that, we have to ask lots of questions. So what kind of questions should we ask? One simple and popular technique is known as 5 whys, because that's exactly what you do. You keep asking why, supposedly 5 times. The idea of this is that you don't stop at the first obvious answer you get, but keep going. You keep asking why to dig deeper and keep looking for better answers. Now, there are things to be said for this approach, and it's a good way to get more experience and practice at asking more and better questions, but it is also a bit simplistic, and there are arguments that why isn't actually the best question to be asking. Asking why in itself has the potential to be a bit blamey. Why did Alex, the SRE, decide to reboot the server when responding to that alert at 3 a.m.? All the best incidents always happen at 3 a.m. As opposed to how did Alex make the decision that rebooting the server at 3 a.m. was the best thing to do? That immediately pushes the focus of the question beyond Alex, assumes that they acted with good intent, and hopefully leads to more questions about what the state of the system was at the time and what information Alex had to work on. So substituting how for why is a good start, but there's so much more that we can ask. So John Allsport is a leading figure in the field of resilience engineering. He's the founder of Adaptive Capacity Labs. He used to be CTO at Etsy. Before that, he was at Flickr. And the following are examples of just some of the questions that he suggested we should be asking after incidents. Things like, what do people do during the response to incidents that they don't make explicit? What tricks or shortcuts do they use that others aren't aware of? Which tools prove to be useful? Which tools prove to be distracting or unhelpful? How do teams perceive which parts of their application or systems are too risky to touch? How did this view arise? How universal is that perspective amongst all teams? Are there any sources of data about the system, logs, graphs, etc., that people regularly dismiss or are suspicious of? So incidents can often be the time when expert knowledge about a system, the kind of knowledge you only get from experience and with working closely with a particular system, is used and drawn upon almost without people realizing it. Those times when it looks like someone is working more on instinct than anything else, when they know, just which error message to look for in a log file, or they know to ignore a particular metric on a dashboard. And it's when people are working under the pressure that comes with a major incident that expert knowledge surfaces. And a post-mortem is the process by which you can mine that wealth of knowledge and extract learning from it. Also, we shouldn't forget about the people side of things. Our systems are socio-technical systems, after all. Incidents and how we handle them have the potential to reveal a lot about our policies and processes, and even about how our organization is structured and how it functions. Nora Jones, who was part of the chaos engineering team at Netflix, she was head of chaos engineering at Slack and is now CEO and founder of Jelly.io, which is a SaaS incident analysis platform. She gave a talk at the virtual DevOps Enterprise Summit conference back in May about incident analysis. And she spoke about the kinds of things you can learn from looking at the people side of incidents and the kind of questions we should be asking. Things like, who goes on call? Is it junior people or senior? Is it always that one superhero engineer who always knows how everything works and somehow seems to be everywhere at all times? How often are people on call? When that 3 a.m. alert came through, was Alex, the SRE, already exhausted from doing a 10-hour day at work? Were they exhausted because they'd already been up till 2 a.m. responding to another alert? How familiar are they with the system they're supporting? Is it an application they helped to build? If not, how good was the handover when it went live? How are we training and supporting our engineers for being on call? How good is the documentation? How good are the dashboards? Are they dealing with incidents by themselves, or is there support available at 3 a.m.? Who do they escalate to and when and why? Who's in the incident channel? How many separate incident channels are there? Is this incident part of a wider pattern? So Nora Jones talked about one company she was at where she spotted a pattern of incidents, a spike that happened every quarter. And when she investigated it, it emerged that it was actually caused by the company's policies around rewards, bonuses and promotions. So engineers had individual quarterly targets to meet, what Nora Jones called promotion packets, that they had to meet by the end of the quarter to get bonuses and be considered for promotion. And what was happening was that as the end of the quarter approached, engineers were rushing to finish these promotion packets and were merging code that wasn't really ready to be merged. And that then caused a spike in incidents. That just blew me away, that it's possible to make a direct link between incidents in production and the company's incentivization scheme. I just think that's amazing. So as Dr. Cook said, there's wisdom in incidents. Okay, let's move on to look at some best practices for running successful postmortems in no particular order of importance. Ask someone not involved in the incident itself, an independent third party, to facilitate the discussion. This is really important. You need someone who can take a step back and ask seemingly naive questions to tease out the really good information that those who are closer to what happened sometimes just don't see. It's that thing of expert knowledge, and you don't know what you know. Having someone objective who can bring a fresh perspective, not just to the incident itself, but also to the underlying system and processes, without any of the, that's just how things work around here bias, is essential. You want your independent third-party facilitator to concentrate on doing just that, facilitating. And it's extremely hard to really listen to a conversation, pay attention to what people are saying and sometimes what they're not saying, and frame the right next question to ask if you're also trying to take notes. So find someone else who can do that and act as scribe for the discussion. Try not to leave too long a gap between the incident itself and when you hold the post-mortem. So appoint your facilitator, give them a few days to schedule the meeting, to do some preparatory work, assemble the timeline, maybe talk to some of those involved. But if you leave it too long, people will start to mentally move on and start to forget the detail of what happened. I've been in far too many post-mortem discussions where many of those attending seem to think that the whole point of the meeting is to come up with a list of follow-up actions to be taken. Sometimes people even come along to a post-mortem thinking that they already know exactly what happened and why, and that they know exactly what needs to be done to fix the issue. And it's usually the immediate issue. This is what Dr. Richard Cook calls microfracture repair. So try to avoid this. Only come up with actions if it actually makes sense to do so. There's no requirement or rule written down somewhere that says that after every post-mortem, some part of the system in question needs to be fixed. The value is in the conversation, the learning, and the understanding of the system that comes from that conversation. The focus on the learning. It's recommended that you separate the discussion and the action brainstorming parts into separate meetings and allow a bit of soak time to happen between the two so that people have time to really digest and take on board the learning from the discussion rather than jumping straight to action stations. It might also be that you want different people in those different meetings. For example, you might want to bring in some subject matter experts when it comes to discussing any changes that need to be made. Any work and actions that do come out of postmortems need to be added to teams' normal backlogs of work, not recorded on a wiki page or Word document somewhere, and not added to a special and separate JIRA project. It needs to be in with teams' normal work so it's visible to them and so that it can be prioritized alongside everything else they have to do. Otherwise, it just won't get done. When you hold your post-mortem meeting, it should be open to anyone who's interested and wants to attend. That, of course, means you need to publish the details of when and where post-mortems are happening, along with some information about what the incident was. Don't be defensive. Embrace the ideals of being open and honest, and look to find the value and the lessons in your incident and how you responded to it. And be in no doubt, if people are choosing to come along to your postmortems, that's a good thing. Take that as a sign that you're doing them well, that people are interested and that they're learning things. When you're done with the meeting, write up the discussion and findings and publish the write-up for anyone to read. Being open and honest extends beyond the discussion itself, and another team might learn something from your experience. They should be in a central location, not in individual team spaces. And ideally, they should be searchable so that everyone knows where to go to find good write-ups and can search for ones that are relevant to their current problem or investigation. It's all about turning team learning into organizational learning. John Allsport actually says that how often your post-mortem write-ups are read by people outside the team is a measure of how good a company's incident analysis process is, and is actually a metric that you should be tracked at an organizational level. So do them for near misses as well as for full-blown incidents. There's still loads you can learn, and you might prevent the same situation from occurring again and becoming a full outage in the future. You know, it can be a bit fuzzy sometimes between an almost incident and what we decide is the real thing. And those near misses are excellent opportunities for learning. Get creative with the questions you ask. Don't just go through the motions of what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we do better next time. Really try to understand how the decisions were made, what information those decisions were based on, and who was making the decisions. Take a step back, look at the wider system, look for patterns. And finally, don't forget to retro your post-mortem process itself from time to time. Take the time to reflect, evaluate, and look for ways to improve. So to summarize, post-mortems are about improving our understanding of our systems, both technical and social. Focus on learning, not actions. Always assume good intent and always stay curious. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I had to get a cat in there somewhere, the rules for my talks. So that's the Cheshire Cat to go along with Alice from Curiouser and Curiouser.
Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Sharing.
That was brilliant. I'll pass over to Andy. I should be able to unmute yourself, Andy, for the Q&A. I've seen we've got a few questions in, so let me pass over to Andy.
Thanks, Sophie. That was awesome. Yeah, I was just trying to think. The last time I was at a post-mortem in the office is a long time ago, so I'd be really interested in people's experiences of how working from home affects this process as well as we go through it. But we've got loads of questions here. Is it right if we just go from the start and see if we can pick them off one by one?
Yeah, go for
it. Cool. Let me just check. So one of the first questions is, should we have a post-mortem for every incident? And I guess the implicit answer there is, like, no one does that, do they? So how could you answer that, or just confirm what you think and where you find the balance between when to run a post-mortem and when not to?
I guess it's just experience in the team. You know if you've seen something new and different, or maybe the team were extra stressed or found, it was an incident that took a long time to resolve, or just kind of, go on feeling, I think. I don't think there's any hard and fast rules on that one.
I know where we work at Auto Trader, we used to have different incident classifications and then ended up just leaving it to judgment a bit more, I think. So I think we can talk about that as well. One of the things, the next question that Johnny asked was that, which I think is really, really interesting, is how do we attribute accountability in blameless postmortems, or do we have to view that in a different way? So I think there's kind of like a feeling that when you go through a blameless culture kind of approach, that lets people off the hook for doing something really stupid and there's no accountability. How do you find a balance for that?
I don't know whether I err too much on the side of just don't blame, because my question is always, why did they make that choice? What was the information they had? And even if they've done something really stupid, it's like, well, were they not given the training? Were they not given the time? Were they working on their own? I think there's always a reason. I don't know, maybe I'm too eager not to blame people, but I always think there's other take a step back and look at the wider and the next level.
There is a kind of commitment there, isn't there, to say that if the post-mortem itself is blameless, then what people reveal or what people say in that post-mortem, you have to have some agreement that they're not going to be punished unduly for being honest or being open. Is that fair, or is that something that is too hippie? I don't know.
No, I think I'm a total hippie when it comes to this. I don't think you can be hippie enough.
I was desperately trying to find, while you were talking, an article that John Allsport wrote on that when he was back at, I think this was back at sort of Etsy days. So I'll post that in the chat, because what he starts to talk about is the impact of not, much more like you've got a trade-off here. You can kind of have punishment and kind of feel good about yourself, and ultimately make the same mistakes again and again and again. He brings in this idea of this bad apple theory where, like, you know, the idea is that everything's fine apart from that one bad apple. If we just got rid of that person, everything would be fine. And it's like a massive, massive mistake. Just trying to go through the next question here. Should a post-mortem have a desired outcome? You said about learning rather than actions. Do you try and balance the two, or do you anything that you would try and warn against having as an output?
The only thing I think would warn against is that list of actions and just jumping to, you know, I've seen people rush the discussion part and not kind of even bother asking any questions really, because they kind of think they already know what the answer is and they think they know what the fix is. So you miss out on this giant chunk of stuff you could be learning. So like I said in my talk, don't think that you have to have a list of actions. If there's an obvious fix and there's an obvious, you know, then go. I'm not saying don't fix things when things are broken, but some people, like, you can see them itching to get to the actions list.
No, totally. Yeah, exactly right. Like, it's a shortcut. So let's not learn anything. Let's just get some stuff written down so we can show people that we've done it and we can move on with our day, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I'm just trying to pick through the first questions from people who didn't organise the event, so we can just make sure that Dave and James don't get all the questions in first. So I'm just scanning down. One again from Johnny here. Not a question, but an attitude of that's just how Company X operates is a pet peeve. I like to remind people who say these things that you are part of Company X. Do you find like people's ingrained habits and the culture of organisations sort of prevent them confronting how to do things differently?
Yeah, I've seen that quite a bit, I think, and I think people think they're doing a post-mortem. There's this idea that we've done it and you've just come to a very superficial process, and it's about getting a kind of customer root cause analysis out. And, you know, there's almost a disparity as well sometimes between what the discussion is and what we're going to say to customers, which, I mean, I guess you have to put a public face on it, but sometimes it feels like there's a real gap between. Am I even answering the question? Am I waffling on about something completely different here?
No, I think that's right. That public face of what you account for as well is really interesting. I think Johnny was asking about, like, that's just how we do things, like not confronting that things could change just because, well, that's how it works. Sorry, you know. Yes,
yeah, I do see. I've seen that quite a bit as well.
One question from Rob. I have to admit, I don't know about this in particular, so maybe we can get Rob on to explain. But what are your thoughts on the well-documented PagerDuty incident response model? They include post-mortem process as well as how to deal with varying forms of bias. I haven't worked with that myself, so any experience with that, Sophie?
No, I'm not familiar with that. I'm going to go look at that after this.
If anyone wants to elaborate more on that, stick your hand up, and we can maybe come in and maybe can like talk about the benefits of that or the pros and cons anyway. One question here, Johnny, who is winning the award for most questions at the moment. Where do you feel the importance of attributing loss of value lies? So the actual costs of an incident, costs to customers, maybe costs internally in terms of your teams, systems, everything else.
I don't know. I've not really thought about that actually. Of actually kind of quantifying it. That's an interesting idea.
My only experience of that, I don't know if anybody else wants to put their hand up and jump in, but my only experience is when you have to give that public view. You know, internally we never talk about costs really, but when we go to externally, we might have to break down the incident and impact into cost estimates for different customers or something else, which is not a fun issue, not a fun process, but tends to be separate from the learning of how we work together to fix it. That makes sense? Yeah,
I'm not sure how I'd feel about that, because that's starting to feel like a bit of a stick to kind of beat people with again. Maybe not, maybe if you did it carefully.
Do you know, it may be something that we as a technical team sometimes ignore, in that commercially, do we understand the impact of what we're doing, the costs of rectifying issues, the cost of issues themselves, the cost of rerunning that job, or I don't know, the cost to customers of downtime. Like, it might help us prioritize more if we understood more of that, but I have to admit that in most post-mortem groups, it doesn't tend to have a commercial aspect to the discussion. I'm just going to go back down through James and Dave's now because I've ignored them. Sorry. Who do you think is responsible for setting up and facilitating the post-mortem? You said a bit about independent facilitation, but whose responsibility is it to set something up, Sophie? And would you recommend how it works best?
So I've tried to do it in the past is kind of just have almost like a team of people who are happy to facilitate, and kind of almost independent of teams, so teams know that they can go and ask. We've had an incident. Can you come and run a post-mortem for us?
And the team who has felt the impact of that incident most would be the people requesting that, would you say? Or does it need to have a separate party saying, hang on, I think you need to run a
No, it's usually been by the team, because teams are usually willing to learn, aren't they? That's my experience, is that they want to do it because they want the value of that it's making that kind of pain mean something, isn't it?
Yeah. If you've been the ones up at 2 o'clock in the morning or missing your family dinner or whatever else, there tends to be an incentive to not be in that situation again, doesn't it?
Yeah. I've also seen them be organised by managers as well, but it's usually someone connected with the team, I've found.
Yeah, organised by managers. You seem to sort of say that with a bit of a tone in your voice, like that would not be a good idea, or do you think that's an acceptable way to run things?
I think again, it depends what the motivation is. If the motivation is a good one and they want to get good things out of it, but if it's just us because we're running a post-mortem because that's what we do, and it's just like, oh, it's such a chore, but we have to do it because then that's pointless, isn't it?
Yeah, I like when you said that post-mortem should be open for everyone, but if the CEO walks in, then it does change the atmosphere a bit, doesn't it?
It probably does. It probably shouldn't, but it probably does.
So just scanning through the ones that have missed out. If anyone has an extra question, please shout out.
We've got Johnny raised his hand, I think, Andy, if you want me
sorry,
to.
do you want to bring Johnny in? Johnny, can you are you off mute at the moment?
Just clicked it for you.
I am, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Johnny.
Oh, yeah, great. So it's just going back to the point about like, I am company X sort of thing. So where I work, I hear a lot of, oh, well, it's just how it works. It's this idea that things are never going to change. So I'll be honest, we don't do postmortems probably as much as we should, or as much as I think we should, because I believe there is a benefit in having that discussion, that conversation around what went wrong in order to find out how we can improve the system going forward. But it's always something that strikes me as being slightly odd in that if people are saying, oh, it's just how it works, are they distancing themselves away from having the ability to make the change? So I always like to tell people, well, hang on a minute, you work here, you are part of this company. If it's something that you feel is an issue and it needs to be changed, that ultimately you have to shout loud enough about that until someone says, right, we'll take you seriously and take that point forward. I get that it's very different for different people. They might not feel comfortable doing those sorts of things, but I think it's something that if we had that ability and had that, space to feel that that was okay to do, that we would get better systems over time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Johnny, what do you think is what leads people to feel helpless like that?
I think psychological safety plays a large part of it. The ability for an individual to say, that's not right, especially when there is a culture of known culture of bad mouthing behind the back, if you will. So if we know that certain parties or certain individuals might go away and discuss things about how they're unhappy about how a team works, that might drive this culture of fear amongst teams. I like to think of, I think it's Jez Humble. There was a Jez Humble video online and he talked about taking the person out for lunch. Now, obviously in the time of COVID, that's been very difficult to do, but maybe you butt heads with some individual across another team and it's driven friction in the teams. Maybe that's the answer, have a conversation with that person, find out what their pain points are, understand their problems from their perspective. Because at the end of the day, if we're all working for the same business, surely we're all looking for the same business outcomes. We're just doing another part of the cog in the machine, if you will.
Yeah, that's right. Ultimately, these post-mortems are about understanding other people's points of view, aren't they? Understanding what it looked like to be working in that situation, and to get away from that. Sophie, you mentioned about not blaming, not being blamey, not using blamey language, but I guess that involves inside the meeting itself, but also your behaviour outside of that meeting around what happened. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. And it's also what I've seen sometimes is inside a team, they can be kind of quite blamey. Of, you know, if someone else had caused them a problem, and on the outside they're like, no, it's fine, you know, we'll just sort out. And inside they're going, oh, bloody idiot, God, what have they done that for again? And that stops them from looking at, like I said, asking wider questions. But so it's not just about not actually publicly blaming the person or the team for something that's happened. It's very much about how you think.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I don't want to leave Matthew waiting too long. So maybe just the last question I'll pick out of here, which I'm interested in. There's some practical time issues here, and we want to run lots of post-mortems. We want to give as much time to learning. What prep helps get to that quickest, and what can you do before the meeting to try and speed things up or just make it as efficient as possible, do you think?
Having the facilitator actually kind of know what the timeline of the event was, and even go and talk to people in advance if that helps. It's just you want the actual meeting to be really a valuable, you know, use of that good use of that time. So don't waste that on kind of then assembling a timeline on a whiteboard and saying, so what happened? You want to be able to go right in and kind of start pulling out the interesting bits.
Absolutely, yeah. So you can start the meeting straight away with all the facts to hand, kind of thing. Yeah, definitely feel that works. It's frustrating if you spend the first hour of a meeting what you want to be productive arguing about what time something happened.
Yeah.
Cool, great. I think we're just about running out of time now, so I might hand back to James. If you've got any other questions, please post them in the chat. I'll try and pick up any that we didn't answer. Send them over to Sophie, see if we can get them out, at something in a written format if there's anything important. So thanks for all your questions. We'll do this again after. Just listen to Matthew for a second.
Well, and thank you again, Sophie, for your second talk at DevOps Manchester.
Thanks,
and it's particularly, I think, from the questions as well, that kind of post-mortem's an emotive topic, isn't it? So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Right, let's move on now. These slides are coming through again. So yeah, over to Matthew now. We're lucky to have Matthew returning to speak for us. I think, from memory, Matthew, is this the third time? Is this the hat trick ball? I think at this point, I think it might be your third talk. If not one more, I think it's three. And as you can see on the slide, Matthew's co-founder over at Conflux, but also co-author of a really popular book that I'm sure lots of people online have read called Team Topologies. I'll hand over to Matthew now for his talk on business and technical agility with team topologies. If I also remember to unmute as well, that would be useful, wouldn't it? There we go.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. Good to be back. I can't remember how many times it is. It's at least 3, possibly more, and it's great to be here. I need to share my screen. Bear with me 1 second. Okay. We should say 15th of September 2021.
Yep, slides all
Great.
there.
Hot to trot. So my background is as a software developer, but I've increasingly been doing lots of different things since then. Organized conferences. I effectively now most of the time help organizations to become more effective with software delivery, going from the very kind of ground up, so pairing with developers on logging techniques, all the way up to C-suite, talking about kind of strategy for kind of cloud transformation, that kind of thing. And a good chunk of that work is around this book here. So this is a book, Team Topologies, published 2 years ago, almost to the day. Not quite 2 years ago. It was published on the 19th of September, 2019, so almost 2 years. The book has been described as Team Topologies book has been described as innovative tools and concepts for structuring the next generation digital operating model. And I can give you a little bit of an insight. We've already agreed with the publishers IT Revolution that there'll be another book coming in a couple of years' time. Manuel and I will be writing that. We're not exactly sure what the focus will be, but it will be kind of an extension of the ideas from team topologies. And increasingly, we're finding that organizations are asking us for help with their operating model. And really, team topologies provides, as Charles Betts identified, it provides kind of some really key parts of a modern operating model for companies that use software a lot. Okay, here's this talk. 4 things. What is business agility? Let's talk a little bit about being agile, not doing agile. Let's talk a little bit as well about a product mindset and what that brings. And then there's a few examples of team topologies in action. And if you prefer to kind of go to sleep in the later part of the talk, feel free. I've summarized the talk in these next 5 slides. So here we go. How does team topologies help with business and technical agility? First off, team topologies encourages decoupling of business concepts to help make the organization more responsive. What we found in lots of organizations is that lots of business concepts are tangled together, which means it's very difficult to have fast flows of change through the organization because everything takes so long because things are so tangled at a business conceptual level. That then is reflected in tangled monolithic software. So team topology is encouraging organizations to do that decoupling. Team topologies patterns help to turn what used to be blocking compliance checks, things like security or financial compliance checks that were blocking. So you'd hand that software to like a compliance team to check it. Team topologies helps to turn those blocking compliance checks into self-service, flow-aligned, API-driven checks. We're aiming for a fast flow change. So we, instead of checking things by a specific team, we actually have those checks in an API self-service manner instead. What we've realized is, I mean, we sort of knew this as we were writing the book, but we've certainly realized since we're working with loads of organizations since 2019, is that team topology is really partly a sense-making approach to help organizations gain situational awareness. And through that, they gain more agility because they understand better where they are now. So they can become more nimble, more agile, if you like, that increase their agility, move better. And fourth point here, team topologies helps the organization to focus tightly on its core mission via value streams and by limiting team cognitive load, specifically limiting extraneous team cognitive load. And that relates to some concepts from domain-driven design, DDD, and things like that. And team topology is encouraging organizations to have important conversations about what different parts of the organization are supposed to be doing and why. And that ends up increasing business and technical agility. Okay, let's go into a bit of detail. Apologies for the car horns outside, by the way, if you can hear those. This is my definition. Business agility is the ability to respond rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. When I say rapidly, I mean within hours. We should be able to change some software, deploy it possibly within minutes, but certainly within hours in response to something that has happened. It could be some sort of external event. We need to be able to make changes to our systems within that kind of time frame. It's no longer acceptable to make changes in the space of days or weeks or months as things used to happen. We're talking about hours now as the time frame that we need to make changes. What's the context for this? Well, the pandemic has brought in this kind of remote first approach. The remote first is not going away. It's a kind of a new normal. There'll be some sort of hybrid for most organizations. We have to deal with this. We have to be able to deal with things like remote first that come out in the future, things like the pandemic. There'll be another pandemic at some point, although there'll be continued pandemic, new variants, whatever. But there'll be something else. I mean, there's climate change happening. There's geopolitical change happening. Technology change is accelerating. So we have to be able to respond to these things. And we can't really predict what the effects are going to be because there's lots of interconnected effects. So the organizations have to be able to have this kind of business agility to respond to these things. And largely because of the internet, but another technologies, there's increased global and local competition. Again, we can't necessarily always predict where that's going to come from as well, unless we use some more advanced techniques. So we have to at least be nimble enough to respond. Some interesting questions we can ask ourselves in our organizations are these. How would we optimize for a fast flow of change? I mean, the answer basically is in the Team Topologies book. This is the answer to that question, effectively. How do we optimize for a fast flow of change? Or it's one of the questions that we answer. Another question would be, how would we make sure we focus on user needs? There's so many organizations that don't really appear to care about user needs, even though that's effectively how the organization exists in terms of revenue. So what would we need to do to make sure we do actually focus on the actual needs of users? And how would we easily course correct when we need to adjust? How do we know when we've gone wrong? How do we know when we do need to change something? Those are three out of many important questions that are going to be important to answer. And Team Topologies provides substantial parts of the answers to those kind of questions. So lots of organizations are sort of questioning agile with a capital A at the moment. And that part of the reason for that is that there's a lot of kind of process and ceremony and dogma around what capital A agile means. And really, it's important to get back to the intent and roots behind some of these things and look to become nimble, have that kind of agility rather than just following a whole prescription. I'm sure many of you will be familiar with the State of DevOps reports starting in 2013. These annual surveys of many thousands of IT professionals and using really rigorous statistical methods to provide some kind of predictability in the answers. They're looking at practices and capabilities that drive high performance. Lots and lots of interesting technical practices that are kind of identified in some of these reports. I've picked some out from the 2019 report. Things like loosely coupled systems, lightweight change processes, trunk-based development, and so on and so on. You'll have heard of these 4 key metrics that came out of the book Accelerate. The authors of the book Accelerate were all involved in the State of DevOps reports. Lead time, deployment frequency, mean time to restore and change fail percentage. These are 4, not the only metrics you need to track, but these are 4 kind of key metrics which, if you can improve these by doing something holistically in your organization, then you're heading in the right direction. Now, interestingly, in 2021, in the State of DevOps report 2021, Team Topologies was identified as a real key set of practices for organizations. As part of the survey, the respondents were asked various questions about kind of how the teams are structured and responsibilities and that kind of thing. And there's some quite substantial analysis about how Team Topologies can help organizations become more effective. So there's a quotation in there: the principles and patterns from Team Topologies are helping organizations in every sector and geography to become more high performing. If you've not read that yet, it came out a couple of months ago. Head to puppet.com and search for State of DevOps Report 2021. There's some really key insights in there. So what else do we need? If we're going to be agile with a small a, not just follow the ceremonies, we need fast feedback via deployment pipelines. This is absolutely fundamental. And when I say fast feedback, I mean within seconds or minutes, we're getting some response back from our deployment system. We're not waiting for 40 minutes or 3 hours for something to build and test. We need really sound, good technical practices, things like test-driven development and similar things. That's the absolute foundation to enable us to make these kind of changes with confidence and safely. We need team ownership of software and services. Increasingly, that's apparent that actually drives better results for organizations. There's some specific things. The State of DevOps reports found that actually making sure to restore configuration and version control is actually a key indicator of high organizational performance. These days, we're going to use something like Git. It's not the nicest version control system, but it's the one that has the best tooling. And that's configuration for everything. Everything that is kind of software-ish, source code, firewall rules, the whole lot needs to be in version control. We need to have this kind of transparency in operation, kind of taking ideas from cloud native. Some people call it observability. We need to make sure that the operation of our software is transparent. As Sophie said in her talk, we can't see software working. but we need to somehow expose aspects of how it works so that we can get a handle on it. We can try and understand what's going on. And of course, we need to make sure that our stuff is designed for automation. We can't be expecting people to press buttons and click things on a screen. We actually also, though, need kind of realigned architecture, software systems architecture. We can't just expect to run the same software systems that were designed for something maybe 10, 15 years ago. They were designed for one particular set of conditions, but the conditions we're trying to aim for now is agility. Back perhaps 10, 15 years ago, those architectures were probably optimized for cost or license reuse or something like this. Now we're trying to optimize for a fast flow of change. And so our architectures need to change, or likely need to change, to enable that new optimization. We should be using techniques like domain-driven design, almost certainly. Every organization that we've worked with since the book was published has had a need for domain-driven design or techniques inspired by that. And as I said, kind of hinted at before, this is really about untangling business concepts to enable a faster flow of change, amongst other things. We can use techniques like Wardley maps to increase situational awareness and apply the right techniques in the right part of the organization, understand what we should build and what we should look to pull in from the outside. And we can combine domain-driven design and Wardley maps with team topologies. In fact, people like Suzanne Kaiser are doing this right now, bringing those three things together, and it's an incredibly powerful set of techniques for looking at how we build things and what we build things and why and when we should switch and change to do something different. So from a team topologies perspective, we're starting with the need to have a rapid flow of change. That change is, that's a design principle. You could choose another design principle. In team topologies, we choose this as our starting point. We need a rapid flow of change. But we also need rapid feedback from running systems into the teams that are building these systems so they understand what's happening. And if you look at the organization kind of designs of the past, there were lots of handoffs from one team to another. We had functional silos, development, testing, maybe transition, operations or BAU. These handoffs, not only was there a problem, typically some sort of problem happening at somewhere down these handoffs, typically before live, but handoffs kill flow. Handoffs is one of the things that really kills the flow of change. I mean, from a mathematical perspective. So what we need to do is to get rid of these handovers. So our starting point is what we call a stream aligned team. A team aligned to the stream of change. Typically, you might call it a value stream, aligned to the stream of change within the organization. And this team, there's no handoffs. There's definitely no internal handoffs either. This team has got all the capabilities it needs to build and run a particular software service or user journey or part of the system. They have end-to-end responsibility. They run it in the live system. No one else runs it for them. They are on call, they're running this system, and they get that feedback coming from live. The live systems in the diagram here, it's in green. That telemetry and feedback from the live systems back into their team so they can understand how to respond and do things better. Supporting supporting those concepts of streamlined teams. So a streamlined team is a fundamental starting point, and most teams in an organization we think should be of that type. There are three supporting team types though in team topologies. Enabling team, a group of experts that helps a streamlined team to bridge a capability gap or detect some missing skills. A complicated subsystem team, which reduces the cognitive load on a streamlined team by dealing with something that's really awkward, some really complicated mathematics or processing or something like that. But we only have one of those if the cognitive load on the streamlined team would otherwise be too great. And finally, the third kind of supporting team type is a platform team. There's a different kind of platform to the kind of platforms we've had in the past. This kind of platform is there to accelerate flow of change in the streamlined teams by reducing cognitive load. And that's really the only purpose for a platform. In our world, in a team topology sense, we're not looking to reduce duplication necessarily. We're not looking to decrease costs. We're not looking to share licenses. It's not about shared services in itself. It's there to accelerate flow of change in streamlined teams partly by reducing cognitive load. It's a really important kind of concept that is actually quite new, even though the name platform is quite similar to what's been there in the past. But different types of team are not the only thing that's needed. The different types of team bring a huge degree of clarity, and that seems to help a lot of people because we've got a greater clarity of purpose. But team types by themselves are not going to give you everything you need. We also need to think about how they're interacting. Like any kind of complex system, the behavior emerges from the interactions between the parts, not from the parts themselves. So we've defined 3 interaction modes: collaboration, 2 teams working together for a defined period of time to achieve a specific outcome. And that working together might take days or maybe a few weeks, but not much longer than that. We're not just expecting people to work together on an ongoing basis because it's very costly and it increases cognitive load. So we work together to achieve a specific thing. We're discovering where an API should be, or we're finding out how to do this integration. And then we cease that collaboration, because if that collaboration is going on longer and longer and longer, something else is wrong. We need a different approach. What we're trying to do is get to X as a service, where one team's providing something and one team is consuming something as a service. That scales really, really well. That kind of limits cognitive load on both sides of that relationship, that interaction. And it's very clear who is responsible for each part. But we can't immediately introduce an X as a service relationship. We have to kind of collaborate first to find out exactly where the boundaries are. So there's already a kind of transition from one way of interacting between 2 teams to another way. And the final interaction mode is called facilitating. One team is helping another team to do something like adopt a new set of practices, adopt a new tool, move from Oracle to pretty much anything else as a database, something like this. So these different ways of interacting set the conditions and the expectations. They set expectations for people inside teams to help them understand how and what they should do, how they should behave, how they should expect to kind of feel when working with another team. And that also increases clarity of purpose and sets some expectations about how long things should take and what we should be doing. Then we can put them together into a diagram like this. This is a snapshot of a tiny part of an organization. It's a point in time. We've got a flow of change going from left to right across the diagram. That's really important because these diagrams here look quite different from lots of diagrams in the past. We've always got a flow of change from left to right. So you can see there that the Streamline team has end-to-end responsibility for a particular service. We've got 2 Streamline teams in the diagram there. They've got end-to-end responsibility because the width of the team kind of stretches across the diagram. They're not handing off to anyone else. They own the end-to-end, including the runtime responsibility of that service. What we're showing in this diagram is that the Streamline team at the top is currently having some facilitation from an enabling team, perhaps helping them to understand machine learning. And they are collaborating, the cross-hatching, collaborating with a complicated subsystem team. Perhaps they're working out how to get some new kind of data processing engine working. The complicated subsystem team is also providing that API, that component as a service to the middle Streamline team. So the Streamline team in the middle has a different interaction at the moment over these days or weeks with that complicated subsystem team compared to the one at the top. So it will feel different. The Streamline team in the middle should expect just to consume that component as a service. It should be really easy to install. It should be really easy to test, really easy to use because they are using it as a service. So it should feel friction-free. So we can start to anticipate, set some expectations about what it should feel like because we're being much more explicit about the kind of interactions and the purpose of working with other teams, the purpose of our interaction with other teams. And that's really, really valuable. So some other things we can do is to track dependencies and separate these as blocking versus non-blocking. What do I mean by that? Let's have a look. At the top here, we've got the concept of blocking dependencies. We've got a team working on some stuff. We've got these arrows, we've got change flowing through their deployment pipeline, but then we hit a blocker and we have to wait on another team for them to do something. Perhaps it's checking something. Perhaps they have to spin up an environment or something like this. And then we progress a bit further. Oh, then we've got to stop again and we're blocked again. So these kind of, that's the row of arrows at the top there is blocking dependencies. Contrast that with non-blocking dependencies at the bottom, where we can consume that kind of capability, that compliance check or that infrastructure creation as a service from a platform underneath us. So we're not building everything, we're consuming some stuff from outside, but it's not blocking us because it's self-service, consume it ourselves. So we're really looking for all opportunities to remove barriers to flow, remove handoffs, approval gates, manual inspections, and replace these with self-service APIs. And this is a real mindset shift, but really important for organizational agility. The mindset for people formally or traditionally from a kind of compliance and checking background have to move from a kind of permitting mindset to a kind of enabling mindset. How can I enable these teams to go really quickly while still being compliant or while still being secure? And that's a challenge, but it's what's needed. So here's a question to ask, basically, what will be needed for us to be compliant with security or finance or PII rules with multiple decoupled rapid flows of change? The answer lies somewhere in kind of self-service APIs and compliance as code and that kind of thing. So you might end up with some domain experts as an enabling team for things like compliance and governance, shown in purple, but then you might have like an API for compliance as code coming from a platform, something like that. So we can start to see the kind of conversations that we can have using the team topologies, terminology and concepts. We can have very rich conversations about the kind of things we need to have in place if we're going to have a fast flow of change that is compliant and secure. Let's have a quick look then at how a product mindset can help with some of this stuff too. Marty Kagan, who is kind of, he's from the Silicon Valley product group, kind of product supremo really, talks about a product as a holistic user experience. Example, if I go into the center of Leeds where I live and go to a sports shoe shop like this, I took the photograph before the lockdown. If I go into Central Leeds and look at these shoes, I can go and I can say, yeah, I'd like that one. I think I'll buy that one. But I can change my mind. A product is optional to use. No one is forced to use the product. No one is forcing me to buy a pair of trainers. That's the first thing. The second thing is a product is carefully designed and curated. Someone's thought about it. Someone's thought about its use. Someone's thought about how well it fits kind of ergonomically with the person who's going to use it. So that's the point number two. Point number three is a product simplifies something for users. This is a very early version of Spotify. I took this picture on the in a museum in San Francisco for kind of old slot machine, coin machines. And basically you put like you put a nickel in there and you get a song. It's a jukebox basically. It simplified my life. I don't have to carry around an old style record player. I can just put a nickel in the slot and it'll play me a tune. So it's simplifying something for the users. Fourth point, the product is going to evolve to take advantage of technology changes. And the final point here is if you think about all of this in the context of software that we're building, particularly a platform like an internal set of tools and things like this, it can really help to take this approach. We can see that a strong focus on user needs is driving good software. We know that already from all the stuff around user experience. This is a massive differentiator for companies in the marketplace, really good UX. But often organizations forget to apply that internally. We know that software should kind of get out of the way. We know that we should design for usability. Why do organizations not apply that internally to their internal software and platforms and things that they're developing? So we can apply product management to internal platforms, internal tooling, internal deployment stuff, internal APIs, abilities to do stuff. To use the product management skills and techniques that are already known, have been known about for decades. And the key part here is, therefore, the platform is optional to use. The internal platform is going to be optional to use. No team is forced to use a platform. So we have to make the platform really compelling, really convincing for internal teams to use. Platforms must advocate for their platform product and kind of market it to internal teams using user personas, user experience, actually talking to other engineers. So start with kind of the people and the experience that an internal platform is going to produce. We see it as a platform being a kind of curated experience for engineers, the internal engineers who are using this, our colleagues inside the company. They're the customers of the platform. And this approach seems to be, or a variation of this, certainly this focus on kind of curated experience for engineers seems to be really, really important for getting this kind of fast flow change, whilst also being able to be have a high degree of business agility, because teams are not teams have the kind of mental capacity to focus on a small area of what they need to focus on, with a chunk of kind of cognitive load taken by the platform instead. So this kind of pattern seems to be really, really important. Okay, let's have a quick look at a couple of examples. There's a whole bunch of case studies in the book from companies like Adidas, OutSystems, UseRich, TransUnion, and so on. It's now basically 24 months since the publication of the Team Topologies book. We've got some newer case studies from organizations who have adopted the ideas. A couple, let's have a look. One, two, well, there's one Manchester company there, Foot Asylum. We've got, and then UseRich, Pure Driven Wealth Wizards are UK. This company, Gensidiga, is Norway's largest insurer, and Kroz is a company based in Croatia. We've got some more case studies coming soon. We've Manuel and I, Manuel, my co-author, and I have also worked with a whole bunch of different organizations since then: banking, technology, governments, telecoms, blah blah blah, whole lot of stuff. We're basically seeing the patterns being valued, the Team Topologies patterns being valued in basically every sector. And currently in every region in the world. I'll just show you a tiny bit about the Foot Asylum case study, because it's actually really interesting. The full case study is on the website, Team Topologies website. The link will come up in a minute. So back in 2018, they needed to change IT to become more responsive. Up to then, there was kind of high fragmentation of work and focus. That's partly because of how the teams were kind of set up and aligned. So then, based on some early understanding of some of the talks and things that Manuel and I have been doing just prior to writing the book, they started to align to what we call business domain. So taking some ideas from things like domain-driven design. They saw us talk at DevOps Enterprise Summit in 2019, so just over 2 years ago. And started to make some of these changes inspired by that. There's a really interesting quote from the case study which I wanted to call out. And that's this: the product managers from each team took special interest in the team interaction types, as it helped them to have useful directed conversations about upcoming work. They could essentially fact check their different roadmaps and make sure that their interactions required were lined up in advance. Now that's something we didn't explicitly design for when we actually wrote the book, but it's a really nice emergent outcome of using the Team Topologies principles, the different team types, and the team interaction modes. Suddenly, effectively, the product managers have got kind of superpowers, because they're able to sort of better predict and plan what's going to happen across the different products. I'm not going to go into all the details here. They made a cake, which is kind of cool. They combine Team Topologies ideas with Wardley mapping. If you're not familiar with Wardley mapping, I just go and Google it. There's a whole lot of free stuff online. It's a super powerful technique. And as I said, people like Susan Kaiser are actually combining Team Topologies, Wardley mapping, and domain-driven design in a kind of extra powerful way for kind of strategy and tactical approaches. So yeah, if you go to teamtopologies.com/examples, you'll be able to find more details. I won't cover it all here today. Another quotation just there from Andy Norton, who was the software development manager at Foot Asylum until recently. The interaction modes defined by Team Topologies gave us real insight into how we could maintain effective practices and cross-team collaboration. That's actually during the it was written last year, basically. So during the early part of the COVID-19 pandemic. So just a shout out, thanks to Paul, Martin, and Andy Norton for that. Okay, so what have we seen? We need to be able to respond rapidly to changing internal and external conditions. We need to give our organizations situational awareness, clarity of business purpose, good technical practices, and enable some localized decisions. We need a strong focus on user needs and user experience, particularly for internal tooling, internal platforms. we've seen a real world example as well. So just to recap, how does Team Topologies help with business and technical agility? And this really is based on what we've seen since the book was published. We've worked with all these different organizations and we've heard people, we've read what they've written. We're not just inventing this. This is basically what we're seeing in the real world. So Team Topologies encourages decoupling of business concepts to help them make their organization more responsive. Team Topologies patterns are helping to turn blocking compliance checks into self-service, flow-aligned API-driven checks, which again helps with the fast flow of change. Team Topologies is partly a sense-making approach to increase kind of situational awareness. And through that situational awareness, we're able to increase our agility because we know where we are, if you like, as an organization, so we're better able to kind of respond and move. And really, Team Topologies helps the organization to kind of focus tightly on its core mission. Really thinking about what's important, what's less important, what's completely, what should we not be building at all? And that ends up being valuable in itself. So we've got some resources online. If you head to our website, teamtopologies.com/resources, we've got a load of tools as well, a lot of which are Creative Commons, effectively open source, Creative Commons share alike. If you go to teamtopologies.com/tools, you'll find that. We've got some infographics. If you head to teamtopologies.com/infographics, you'll get those. Freely shareable, downloadable, whatever. We've got our online academy with one course launched right now, another course launching in a couple of weeks. So that's all video training, and it's been very well received so far. That's all up and running. We've started to work with some partners on various things. So if you're interested in more stuff around this, sign up for our newsletter, teamtopologies.com. Hopefully it's been interesting. I'm looking forward to the questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. You've had absolutely tons of questions coming in, as you can imagine. So thank you for the talk as well. And yeah, we've got a few reactions coming through as well. So I'll hand over to Andy for the questions and just wish good luck because there's lots of them. Unmute. Go.
Thanks, James. Yeah, thanks, Matthew. That's great. Yeah, loads of questions. I was trying to group them into common themes, and you've totally caught me out by finishing a bit early. So I think we're just gonna have to wing it a bit. Thanks everyone for sending the questions you sent in. I'll just go through them one by one and see how much time we've got. Hopefully we've got about 15-20 minutes, so should be enough time to go through a few. First one. I presume you've had quite a few horror stories when engaging with some companies. I know, trying to be discreet, but what are the sort of common challenges you see with people designing teams to promote flow of change?
We've not seen any horror stories in the sense that I think that the organizations so far that have come to us have been the ones that are kind of already a little bit more aware. So I've actually not seen anything truly bad yet. And no doubt that'll come in time. There's lots of different things. I think at least two things are at play here in terms of challenges. One is that some organizations are not ready to put in the groundwork around technical practices. Well, technical and social practices. So things like, just basic stuff, good version control, good engineering discipline, good CI/CD, good incident response. So relating to Sophie's talk, these kind of foundational practices, but also things like putting the space to share, making sure we're doing internal tech talks, making sure we're running some learning activities, whether it's monthly or 6 monthly, like an internal tech conference, things like this. Those kind of foundational kind of technical and social practices. It's really important to have that in place. You can't, it's no use just changing the shape of your teams and calling them different things if you're not going to have that kind of basic foundation in place. That needs to be there. That said, some organizations have that in place. They've got kind of maybe a nice IT or technology division kind of humming along, kind of busy doing stuff. But what might be called the product or business in the organization treats technology as a kind of black box to just receive orders. So that business or product group just says, right, IT, just build this, do this next, do this next. we want this thing, we want this feature, this feature, this feature. And they're completely missing the fact that not only can IT, or should IT and technology should be a key part of how we understand the world through things like good incident reviews, blameless postmortems or whatever, but even more widely than that, how we understand our products, how we understand our users. So it becomes the software part of the organization should become a key part of the organization's kind of sensory apparatus, if you like. But also the concepts at a business and product level are often really tangled. And the people at a product and business in the product and business kind of division often don't want to put the effort in to doing the detangling around the concepts. And so there's a limited amount that the software or IT or engineering division can do if from a business perspective, the concepts are all still tangled. So it's an interesting space to be in.
Yeah, where do you? Yeah, it's the difficult place to start if all these things are affecting each other and interacting. Dave asked that question about the human behaviours that either promote or hinder this sort of second. So you kind of answered that already. I was just to add to that myself. One of the things that I think, we're all humans and we want sort of, I guess, we're looking for status in our job and we're looking for safety in our job and all that kind of stuff. How much do those sort of human elements of wanting to build empires or keep control of things get in the way of actually making the right decisions, do you think, and how do you get past that?
Yeah, completely. So yes, I mean, there's definitely those individual behavioral blockers for sure. The empire building thing definitely exists. It doesn't go away with an organization that's designed for fast flow, because what you might have is someone building an empire around a kind of value stream or multiple value streams instead of functional silos. The answer is to change the incentives in the organization, to change how people are measured and rewarded. People will do things based on how they perceive they're going to be measured or rewarded. So change the incentives, link things to their. If you've got if you still have a bonus scheme, I don't know why you would, but anyway, if you've still got a bonus scheme, link things to a bonus scheme. If you've got some other kind of yearly or 6 monthly review process, link behavior to that, including crucially at the manager and director level in the organization. The people in charge of making decisions about prioritization of work need to feel the pain for when things go wrong. If there's incidents in production, they need to be feeling the pain. They need to be right in the detail of what's going wrong and why and how their decisions have caused that outage, and they need to be accountable for it. Otherwise, you won't see the change in behavior.
One question that Johnny asked, which come on to next, is around, you're very much talking about optimizing for flow of change. Do you ever find, or the way Johnny puts it is, what good reasons, if any, of you found for not doing that? Do you feel that are people bought into that as an ideal that they all want to strive for? Do you find people with that fall outside and don't need that as much as maybe we think in sort of?
It's a really good question. So thanks, Peter. We are looking for organizations that do not need to or do not want to optimize for fast flow change. We thought we'd found one. We thought we'd found or a type of organization which we like a kind of engineering or scientific research and development, R&D organization, because we've worked with a couple of those before, and fast flow change is not always the thing that's most important there. So we were thinking probably R&D is not important, and then we got an email from an R&D organization saying, hey, we've just been using team topologies and it's really great. So we're like, oh, damn, that's actually what we thought was, it's not actually true. I think what's really interesting right now is we're in this kind of phase of technology change where, and Simon Wardley, who the inventor of Wardley mapping, talks about this a lot. The speed of change of technology now then becomes compounding, becomes exponentially, is exponential in terms of its increase of speed of change, but also effectiveness and ability to affect other things. And so what in the past would have been a very slow research and development cycle, or now is able to happen much more quickly, so that the fast flow change then becomes something which is much more applicable in many more situations. That said, we're still looking for contexts where fast flow change is not the most important thing. Some government contexts we think that probably applies to teams bodies. Definitely applies to many government contexts because we're working with lots of governments, and we know it's happening. But there might be some government context where it's less applicable. Might be some context around software that is not very updatable. If you think about building a satellite and the software that goes on a satellite, once you've launched the satellite or like a Mars mission or something, they do got software patched, and increasingly you'll be able to do it over the air. But right now, you still probably want to build that as a single thing and not expect to update it a lot. So again, that might be a situation where fast flow change is less relevant. But if anyone's got any examples of of organizations where fast flow change is not the right thing to optimize for, then please let us know, because we want to know these examples so that we can characterize where teams bodies really fits better.
Yeah, I think, Johnny, sorry if I've got some of the names mixed up. I was trying to copy and paste the questions and rearrange them into groups, and I've got some of the names attributed to the wrong questions. But anyway, Johnny just adds to that, saying that, having anecdotes from scientific instrumentation companies that they couldn't do DevOps or fast flow because of compliance and calibration of machines. I've heard counter stories to that around people who make medical grade instruments in hospitals, using lots of, lean and agile principles to increase their rate at which they can release hardware. So there must be sort of competing views on that. Any other examples that you've got, Matthew?
No, I mean, the organization that contacted us with asking for it, they actually want to do a case study, basically, is from an organization building medical devices in the US. So that's exactly in that area, and they can see commercial value from making sure they have a fast flow of change, because that allows them to leapfrog ahead of their competitors. So they explicitly want to get to that point where they can have that fast flow change for certain aspects of their medical devices.
I don't know what you think, Johnny. Maybe we can talk about this after. But there must be some element of people in certain industries thinking they've got a get out of jail free card to say, I don't have to think about team design. I don't have to think about organizational agility because it's not for us. There's always something you can do, right? Have you ever found is that the kind of attitude you go into speak to companies with? Is that the kind of message you try and get across?
Well, you need to meet an organization where they are and need to understand what their perceived challenges are, and then do some discovery and digging and help them realize what their actual challenges are or what the possibilities could be. Because in lots of places, the idea of kind of self-service compliance, and lots of organizations have not seen the kind of tooling that enables, or not seen the skills and engineering approach that enables that kind of way of working. And then you can see the scales fall from their eyes, if you like, and they go, wow, that's actually kind of cool. That would be amazing if we could have kind of self-service compliance. That would enable all of this stuff. And wow, and they get kind of excited. So sometimes it's the hesitancy is there just because people are just not aware of what's possible now. So actually, there's a blocker. There's a real blocker that we see, and the blocker is this. Some organizations, particularly in financial services, in our experience, not only, some organizations block access to pretty much every part of the internet from within their corporate network, which means that the people in the organization do not learn. They are not exposed to modern techniques on a day-by-day basis. They don't know what's actually happening. And some of these people have been there for 10 years or more, 15 years. They've not been exposed to basically anything during their working context that's happening in the outside world. And that's bordering on madness when things are changing so quickly. 5 years ago, the technology stacks and options are very different to what they look like now. And no, certainly 10, 15 years ago, things are massively different. So that's actually a real blocker for organizations, is just not having access to modern tooling and internet-based services and that kind of thing.
And a cultural learning that will go along with that.
Exactly.
Raj is after a bit of free consultancy here, I think. He pitches the question, how, just as we were talking to a larger, more traditional organization, what's your sort of approaches when you first go in to speak to an organization like that, and how to know whether team topology is right for them, and what kind of exercises you do? Is there anything sort of that you could start to talk about to help maybe people understand how they might do the same thing in their own organization?
There's a whole load of stuff that we've got. So we have a mixture of, I showed before, there's online self-paced video learning, video courses, so people can kind of dip in a little bit, get a feel for it. We do live training, which can be a really good way to get people together in the same room, whether it's physical or virtual. We do workshops as well, which help people to discover things for themselves. A huge part of the value in doing these things is actually in getting people together at the same time. And almost like forcing or strongly encouraging a conversation. You find situations where there's people in the same organization, even in the same kind of division, that haven't really talked to each other for 6 months or ever. And then we bring people together, get them to talk about it, have that shared understanding at that specific point to build awareness and to build consensus for change. So some of this is I guess pretty standard kind of organizational change consulting techniques, but kind of we tend to blend it a bit. So that's part of what we do. I'm just trying to think if there's anything unusual.
It sounds like those mapping exercises prove really valuable to sort of visualize how the company is laid out, and I'm sure that must help you get to know the sort of strengths and weaknesses and different character of companies as well. Yeah, what we've really found as a really powerful technique, which is it's completely standard as an approach, is to get people to understand themselves, to get people to do the learning for themselves. So rather than teaching people, rather than kind of traditional training, it's, hey, do this exercise, put yourself in this position, ask yourself the question, what would it take to enable this thing to happen? And then they start to explore that they're in a different space. They're in that kind of learning and discovery space. They then realize, well, actually, yes, if we could have that if we didn't have to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. If you didn't, how would you not be able to do X, Y, and Z? Oh, well, we'd have to do blah, blah, blah. We have to do this differently. So there you've got the answer. They've discovered it themselves. It's more compelling. It's more memorable for them to do that. So we spend a lot of our time helping organizations and people in organizations to discover the answers themselves by a little bit of guiding and using the principles, obviously, from the Team Topologies book. That's great, thank you. Johnny was asking the balance between sort of building systems yourself and the use of third parties. He's saying that Team Topologies book, you guard against using too many third parties, but that some of the mapping, like Wardley maps between customized solutions versus commodity, may mean that using third party options is the right approach. So how do you find a balance, and do you see common mistakes there? Especially, I guess, with platform teams, we're going to come on to a bit, and whether you go to someone else for your platform or you have an internal team yourself building your own.
Right, let me answer that last point straight away, because this is a common misconception. In Team Topologies, when we say platform, we start with a curated experience. That's what it is. Platform is a curated experience. Do you need to build any software or technology to have a curated experience? Nope. You need a wiki page. Let me show you a wiki page. I'll put a link in the chat. So where is it? GitHub.com. There's a page here. Let's find that for example. Here we go. There's a link. TVP example. So we talk about a thinnest viable platform. TVP, thinnest viable platform. And the example I've just linked to in GitHub is literally, and I use that word correctly, literally a platform from a Team Topologies perspective. The thinnest platform you can get is some markdown in a GitHub repository. That is a platform. You do not need to build any code. You're defining an experience. So what we've done here is say there's ABC Corporation, and the platform team, which is probably just a couple of people, have tested some services from a cloud provider, made sure they work together and said, just use these. They've curated an experience for the streamlined teams. They've reduced the cognitive load on the streamlined teams by helping them to get started really quickly and to avoid the million different services from this cloud provider. That is a platform. You don't need to build anything else. If you don't need to build anything else, that's brilliant. because you kept the complexity down. So that's why we put that together, because it's not about selecting a platform from the outside versus building your own. There's a whole different dimension, which is, let's start with user experience and curating an experience for the platform teams. What's the smallest amount of stuff we can do to give streamlined teams a good experience? So we're starting from a very different position. We're really starting with user experience for these internal teams and extending what we're doing based on that. So that said, if we're always thinking about experience, what is the best experience we're going to give? What's the kind of the right way of doing that? Sometimes that's going to be using an external tool. Let's say it's a CI/CD tool. We don't need to build that ourselves. In 2021, it would be kind of unusual to build your own CI/CD tool. I mean, there might be a case for it, but probably not. Let's bring one in from the outside as a service. Probably we don't really want to run it ourselves internally, almost certainly. Bring it in from the outside as a service. But then, there's going to be some markdown or documentation or wiki page around how to configure this external service. There'll be some templates, there'll be some little onboarding things, there'll be some command line tools, whatever, some tools helping you to inspect the configuration or whatever, stuff like this. That's the curation. We're not building everything, but we're curating the experience around it to reduce the extraneous cognitive load on the streamlined team so they can go quicker safely. So it's a kind of different mindset. It's not build versus buy, it's curate an experience and what's the best way of curating that experience.
Okay, thanks. Another sort of area of sort of balance in terms of a large organization where you've got streamlined teams, what do you see works best in terms of teams that stay together or teams that change frequently? And some benefits of moving might be, sort of sharing skills and knowledge around the organization. Sinead asks.
Yeah, no, thanks, Sinead. It's a really good question. So there's some principles here, and we talk about these in the Teams Bodies book, but the value of keeping a team together is that a team is not just a collection of individuals. A team takes time to learn how to work together and be high performing as a group. And it depends on the organization, but it often takes about 3 months. And so if you've taken that time to build up the kind of working arrangements of that team, to then dissolve that team after 3 months means you're throwing away the potential high performance capability of that group. You probably want the teams to be relatively kind of stable and durable in terms of the members. But yes, you don't want them to be stale. So one thing you can do is to use the patterns from the book called Dynamic Reteaming by Heidi Helfand. And she provides an approach to keeping teams fresh in a way which doesn't destroy the kind of high performing aspect, which doesn't just destroy the teams. It keeps the valuable parts of the durable aspect of teams, whilst making sure we're keeping things fresh and allowing people to kind of share knowledge between different teams. So take the approach from dynamic reteaming if you're looking at ways of keeping teams fresh by some sort of cycling of personnel. But it should then be seen as a very positive thing that those teams are changing slowly, rather than just having managers assigning people and plucking people out of teams and dropping them somewhere else. That's a very destructive way of thinking about resources, humans as resources. Turn it into something positive. Take the idea of durable teams, but work out how you're going to keep them kind of fresh and avoid them becoming stale and so on.
Great, thanks. And another, Lee asks as well, a bit on the same kind of theme, is that maybe working in a team feels like you're going to fit in one of those boxes, but lots of our roles are maybe across with multiple responsibilities. So do you see any warning signs or any things that work well between being a member of a streamlined team but having other responsibilities?
It depends what those other responsibilities are. It's very difficult to be part of more than one team. It's almost impossible effectively. So your primary home, if you like, or primary loyalty, or whatever you want to call it, should be with your primary team. You might also be responsible for maybe let's say you're an engineer. Let's say you're an application engineer writing Node to sell something online. But actually, you might also have an interest in facilitation. So you might also become known and over time become kind of an expert in facilitating post-mortems, for example. And so other teams might come to you to help, to ask you to facilitate their post-mortem, like Sophie was saying before. So you've got an additional responsibility outside of that team, but it's not conflicting with your main responsibility building that code. If you think about Conway's law and the kind of team communication patterns, we want to make sure we don't introduce accidental coupling across different parts of our software architecture through kind of multiple dependencies and so on. But if we've got responsibilities outside of the team which are of a different nature to building the code, something like facilitation, something like maybe running internal workshops or talks or helping with recruitment or who knows what, that kind of stuff is not really going to interfere with that kind of main architectural focus. So that kind of stuff is fine. But if an individual feels like they've got split loyalties, that's the indicator that there's a problem, and you should look to address that.
Great, thanks. I think we're probably going to run out of time in a couple of minutes, so maybe just the last question. There's an obligatory thing here about working from home, I think, and working more remotely. Sinead again is asking, she's saying that collaboration, pairing, mobbing works well remotely, but it's more difficult to collaborate. Do you see the models that are working well for companies in the last 18 months have changed? Do you just see it as the same kinds of solutions to the same problems, or is it different now, and as people starting to adopt different ways of working?
It's a really good question. So one of the things, I'll answer it in a second, but one of the things that we've got coming out soon through IT Revolution, the publisher of the Team Porties book, is a short report that focuses on remote first, or hybrid. It's probably going to be remote or hybrid focus, but ways of working from a remote or hybrid context based on some of the Team Porties ideas. Because it turns out we didn't design it this way, but it turns out that a lot of the patterns in Team Porties, if you use them, can actually really help to work in a remote context. Because a lot of what we're talking about is increasing the clarity of purpose of different teams, the clarity of interaction, like why are we working with this other team? All of that stuff is massively important in a remote context. It's important enough if we're all in the same office, but it's very, very important if we're all remote because we can't see each other. So we use that kind of, lightweight wiki documentation, whatever, or what we call Team API, to define our kind of purpose and interactions and ways of working in the next week, next month, whatever. And that helps other people see what we're doing and helps us to kind of set some expectations about how these interactions should work. So having that, setting those expectations first, using some of the Team Porties principles and our terminology and ideas does seem to help with working across teams remotely. It's still, obviously, it's still tricky. But having the key seems to be in some kind of discipline about how we name things, about how we describe things, how we publish things, how we make things searchable. This kind of stuff seems to help. The final thing I'd say on your point, is that one of the things that we talk about in Team Porties is that collaboration is not necessarily a good thing. If you find that teams are having to collaborate a lot all the time, we see that as a signal that a boundary is in the wrong place, probably, or that we've got the wrong capabilities in place, or that something is not available as a service to consume. So that's something to consider as well, is should we even be collaborating? Should actually we look for a better solution, like a more clearly defined boundary, different team responsibilities, consuming something as a service from a platform? That's something else to think about. You
said quite clearly in your definition of collaboration that it was for a defined period of time. Is exactly. That to try and get away from that constant collaboration is the only mode of communicating?
Exactly.
Great, thank you, Matthew. I think we've run out of time. I'm really sorry. I know there's a few questions that we haven't got to. We'll try and get a few of those and see if we can get answers to them offline.
Totally fine. Yeah, just send them through and I'll do what I can. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your time, Matthew. That's great. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Sophie, as well. I'll just finish up with wrapping up as well. Some slides. Let me just paste this into the chat as well, if I can do. So that QR code is a survey that we always take around your experience of DevOps Manchester. Thank you again, both Sophie and Matthew, for tonight. I think we can see from the amount of questions, things like that, the valuable information that you've both covered. Also, as well, from the team of us that organised DevOps Manchester, and on behalf of Matthew and Sophie as well, I want to say thank you to everyone that's attended tonight, and especially around your engagement and questions and comments during the session. Both Sophie and Matthew give up their own free time to do these talks like this in the community for DevOps Manchester, and to have you ask questions like that, like you have done, and share your thoughts, it means a lot. So thank you to you as well. On that note, I hope everybody has a great evening, and that have a safe journey home now might actually be potentially true. So if you are traveling, have a safe journey home. If it's just turning off Zoom, also have a lovely evening, and thank you for coming along, and we'll see everybody soon.